Bug-Eyed Tales presents Wolves by the Altar by Louis H. Eisenmann, translated to English from his German tale of adventure entitled Wölfe am Altar. In 1908 Austria, the wolf has been nearly wiped out, a fading shadow of its once fearsome presence. But in Hungary, in the wilds of Bukovina and eastern Galicia, the wolves still reign, defying every effort to erase them. Here, in the dark, impenetrable forests of the Carpathians, they thrive, untamed and relentless. The peasants live in dread, for when winter's icy grip tightens, hunger drives these beasts from their lairs, transforming them into marauding shadows that haunt the villages. Whole packs, ravenous and desperate, descend from the mountains, invading isolated homesteads, dragging away sheep and livestock, and sometimes, in their savage hunger, even daring to breach the heart of the village itself. As a rule, however, their predatory expeditions take place only at night. But sometimes hunger will urge them out into the open to get a pig, their favorite, or a sheep for their next meal. For when the wolf's belly is empty, no beast surpasses it in boldness and thirst for blood. In the Carpathians, every year a number of persons are killed by wolves, particularly peasants' children on the way to or from school. But grown-up persons also, who are so imprudent as to go out without arms, fall a prey to them. A stout stick might save a life, but when a lone traveler is besieged by a pack, even the sharpest marksman stands little chance. For when these ravenous creatures simultaneously attack from all sides, there is no escape, only the grim inevitability of a violent, bloody end. One cold December night, Stanislaus Bruce, the sacristan of the Galician village of Drobice, faced an encounter so extraordinary that its outcome and the location where it unfolded can only be described as one of a kind. Bruce, a man of about 30, serves as the sacristan of the Drobice parish church. He is also responsible for a small chapel located about 2 miles from the village. The chapel is an interesting building, erected 200 years ago by a noble family in the neighborhood to fulfill a vow. It stands on a hill with a clear view to the north, while dense forests block the scenery in every other direction. The forest chapel, as the villagers call it, is rarely used these days. However, on specific days each year, masses are held for the repose of the founder's soul, and a service is conducted there during the grand church festival. In summer, the chapel draws many pilgrims from nearby villages who come to venerate its revered image of the Virgin. But in winter, when the forest paths are buried under deep snow, the chapel stands deserted and silent, except at Christmas. No matter how harsh the cold, how deep the snow, or how fierce the raging storm, the devout peasants never miss attending the Christmas service. Well, in that chapel, Bruce the sacristan had a fight for life and death with 3 wolves, of which he gives the following account.
On the Wednesday before Christmas, immediately after dinner, I set out for the chapel, intending to get ready for the approaching service. For the sake of company, I took my dog with me. The weather was very bad. It was snowing hard, and the snow in places already reached more than halfway up my thighs. I felt inclined to turn back and postpone the work in the chapel till another day, but the recollection that the next day I should be unable to leave home determined me to proceed. Soon I got into the forest, and to my satisfaction found that it greatly protected me from the fury of the storm. Not long after I entered it, my dog started a hare and ran after it, and although I called and whistled to her, she would not return, and soon disappeared from my sight. When I finally reached the summit where the chapel stands, a fierce snowstorm reduced visibility to just a few feet in front of me. I couldn't see any sign of my dog. To help her find me if she was following, I left the chapel door open. The large porch roof protected the entrance from the driving snow, allowing me to leave the door open without letting the snow in. Then I immediately set to work, for if I wanted to reach home again before nightfall, there was no time to lose. In 2 hours, I finished the greater part of my task, and had at length only to clean the altar, put candles in the candlesticks, and trim the lamps before leaving. It was already beginning to grow dusk. The lamps which I had to fill were standing on the stone flags near the front pew, and I had knelt down on one knee to prevent spilling the oil. While in that pose, holding the oil can in my left hand and the lamp in my right, I suddenly felt something pulling at me on the right. "Oh," thought I, "my good-for-nothing dog has found me out at last." And so, without turning, as I had to keep my eye on the lamp I was filling, I cried, "Ha ha! You have come now, Diana, have you? Wait a bit, you truant, I will teach you a lesson." But my words were cut short, as at that moment I felt something bite my right calf. Although my leg was somewhat protected by my jackboot, the pain was considerable. With a cry, I leapt up and looked round. Imagine my horror when, instead of the dog I expected to see, my eye fell upon a huge, shaggy wolf with hunger burning in its eyes as it stands close in front of me, baring its fangs and ready to spring upon me. My heart almost stopped with terror. I wanted to cry for help, but could not utter a sound. And besides, who would have heard me in that solitary spot? The next moment I had collected myself, and stepping back, I hurled the oil bottle I had in my hand at the beast's head, but did not seem to hurt the creature in the least. Still, it had the effect of startling my assailant for a moment. Seizing this brief window of opportunity, I sprang swiftly onto the altar with a speed as quick as lightning. The wolf, however, almost equally quick, sprang after me, but fortunately I kicked its nose with such violence that it tumbled backwards. Then, standing on the altar, and holding fast to the Virgin's image upon it, I looked round for my enemy and perceived 2 other snarling wolves, which I failed to notice until then. One of them was as large as the first, but the other was a little smaller. They had stopped in the bittle aisle near the door and were closely observing me and the first wolf, which now, after a short pause, renewed the attack. I had made use of the brief interval to get out and open my pocket knife, the only weapon I had with me, and when the wolf was about to spring onto the altar, I lunged out and hacked at its head. With a loud snarl, the brute retreated a pace or two, but in a couple of seconds it returned, stood up on its hind legs, and resting its lean, black-striped forelegs on the altar, tried to tear my leg with its sharp teeth. I struck the dreadful creature again with my knife, this time with more force. It recoiled with a loud howl, clearly more pained than before. It quickly retreated, shaking its head like a dog emerging from water, and rejoined its comrades. It was then that the sheer absurdity of my situation hit me. I was battling wolves on the very altar of a deserted church. The only sounds breaking the silence were the blood-chilling snarls of the beasts and the mournful howl of the blizzard outside. I had managed to fend off the initial attack, but was the battle truly over? I dared to hope the beasts might leave the church, but they didn't. Instead, all 3 wolves slowly advanced toward the altar, moving deliberately, sniffing the air with caution. They were starving and desperate. In the expectation of another and more violent attack, I had altered my position and placed one foot on the tabernacle used for the sacred host, while a large altar candlestick supported the other. But the frame of the altarpiece was too broad for me to get a firm grip, and I was on the verge of losing my balance, risking a fall right into the midst of the bloodthirsty beasts, eager to tear me apart. My situation was a desperate one indeed. Suddenly, however, the wolves, instead of rushing at me, turned and fled out the door. Some sound inaudible to me must have frightened them and caused their flight. I waited a while, and then changed my uncomfortable position a little. Could I try to get off the altar? I wondered. I decided to do so, but alas, at that very moment one of the wolves reappeared in the doorway. Soon after, another entered the chapel, while the third stayed on the threshold, probably to warn the others of any approaching danger. For a time, while the fearful beasts were crouching before me, I was racking my brain to find some means of escape and was wondering if I might try to reach the vestry door, which was but a few steps to the left of the altar. I reasoned that if I could get into the vestry, I should be safe, as the door was strong enough to keep the wolves out. Well then, there was no time to be lost. Slowly I crept to the extreme end of the altar and gradually got down, keeping my eye on the beasts all the while. Then came the question, should I make a dash for it? Or rather, steal quietly along? I decided on the former plan. The wolves did not move. I rushed to the door and grabbed the handle to open it, but to my utter horror, the door wouldn't budge. Then I realized I myself had locked the door just a short while ago, but in my panic and excitement, I had completely forgotten that. There was no time to turn the key. One quick glance over my shoulder revealed the wolves closing in, their strides swift and relentless. I rushed back toward the altar, but before I could reach it, I stepped on a patch of oil that had spilled when I threw the bottle at the wolf. My foot slipped, and I felt myself falling. I breathed a prayer and gave myself up for lost. I actually believed I could feel the wolf's fangs in my neck already. Cold sweat ran down my face. But a stroke of luck saved me, for as I fell, I accidentally struck the ministrant's bell, sending it tumbling down the altar steps. The bell's loud, piercing ring echoed off the stone floor, startling the wolves just long enough for me to scramble back onto the altar. But the next moment, recovering from their temporary fright, the wolves, growling horribly, the hair on their necks bristling with hideous rage, and an almost supernatural fire shining in their eyes, rushed simultaneously towards the altar, trying to get up onto it. I kicked at them with all my might, but in the chaos of my fall, my knife had slipped from my grasp. How long, I speculated, sick with despair, should I be able to defend myself without a weapon? A man's wits work with lightning rapidity at such times. But wait, nearby I had exactly the weapon I needed. One of the heavy metal candlesticks at the altar could serve me well. I could put up a fight and make the wolves pay dearly for my life. I quickly took hold of one of them and struck frantically at the foremost wolf. I succeeded in making the head of the smallest wolf bleed freely. His boldness and thirst for my blood had exceeded that of the other two. Nor did his companions escape scot-free, for I managed to give them some severe blows. You'd think each strike with that brutal weapon could shatter the skull of anything short of an elephant, but every time I believed they had finally been beaten back, they attacked again. After a brief pause, and to my horror, their fury only seemed to grow with each assault. My situation became particularly dire when, as if by agreement, all three attacked me at once, one on the left, one on the right, and the third in front. As I struggled to fend off two of them, another sank its teeth into my leg, biting through my boot with such force that, despite my adrenaline, I was struck by intense pain. It took all my might to free my foot from the wolf's jaws. When the enraged wolf came at me again, I used all my strength and hit it hard on its head with the heavy candlestick. Without a sound, it dropped down, stunned or killed. At once the others withdrew from the fight, their whole attention now on their prostrate comrade, whom they sniffed at on all sides, only from time to time casting a suspicious glance at me. The fallen wolf lay just at the foot of the altar, bringing my enemies dangerously close. Yet frustratingly they stayed just out of reach, dodging my swings with the candlestick. However, when one of them, tempted by the sight of its fallen brother, seemed ready to feast on him and carelessly ventured too close, I seized the moment. I struck hard with the candlestick, causing the beast to stagger backward. It quickly retreated toward the door, its companion following close behind. They no longer seemed eager to continue. Then I got a brief respite. Might I wondered, rejoice in victory? And was this nightmare over? Clearly the wolves had no intention of abandoning the fight. Instead of leaving the chapel as I had hoped, they prowled stealthily between the pews, biding their time and waiting for a better chance to overpower me, or at the very least to satisfy their hunger by devouring their fallen comrade who lay motionless, seemingly dead. Meanwhile, it had grown so dark that I was no longer able to clearly see the wolves in the nave. Only their glistening eyes were still plainly visible, glowing like coals, and fixed unblinkingly on me. Soon it would be quite dark, and then I thought to myself, they will creep up unheard. The fight will begin again and continue until at last they pull me down and tear me to pieces. Minute after minute went by. My heart beat so loudly I could hear it. Was there then no escape? Should I again try and get into the vestry? But I felt sure that before I could turn the key, the wolves would have me by the throat. What else was there to be done? I could not endure the fearful tension much longer. The horrible, luminous eyes constantly fixed upon me were positively hypnotizing. I knew my fate would soon be decided, and the dreadful suspense was becoming unbearable. For a reckless moment I was tempted to leap from the altar and charge at the beasts with my candlestick, but I realized it would be sheer madness. Even if I managed to take down one wolf, the other would have the perfect chance to attack me from behind while I was occupied. Suddenly it struck me. Wild beasts fear fire. Could I create a fire, or at least fashion a torch? Why hadn't I thought of this before? With it, I might be able to escape or even drive the wolves away. Without hesitation, I set my plan into motion. In my coat pocket I had a cloth used for cleaning the lamps, soaked with oil and sure to burn well, but I knew it would only last a few seconds, so I needed more fuel. I cautiously removed my coat and wrapped it tightly around one of the altar candlesticks, securing it with my scarf. Then I covered it with the oily cloth. Now I had what I needed. I held the makeshift torch behind my back and struck a match, keeping the small flame hidden from the wolves until it grew stronger, planning to startle them when it blazed brightly. It was a desperate solution for a desperate situation. Suddenly, I leapt from the altar, torch blazing in one hand and the candlestick in the other, and charged at the wolves, shouting at the top of my lungs. The startled wolves, instead of confronting me, turned and bolted out the door, clearly terrified by the sight of the fire. By the time I reached the threshold, they had vanished into the night. With trembling hands, I grabbed the key from the outer side, quickly locked the door from within, and slammed it shut for good measure. Then I rushed back to the altar. The third wolf still lay where it had fallen, seemingly dead. One thing was certain, that beast was no longer a threat. It took some time for my excitement to subside enough for me to tend to my wounds. My legs had been badly injured, and in the chaos of my fall, I had accidentally inflicted a deep, severe cut on myself with the open knife in my hand. After binding up my injuries as well as I could, I felt anxious to know whether the two other wolves were still just outside the chapel, but did not, of course, venture to open the door. Accordingly, I resolved to spend the night in the chapel and wait till someone should come to look after me, for at home my long absence must be noticed. Thank God, my release, however, came sooner than I had expected, for in a few hours' time I heard human voices and the barking of a dog at the door. When my dog had returned home alone, my brother-in-law and two friends became so uneasy that they started to seek me, fearing I had been lost in the snow and might be frozen to death. Such was my adventure with the wolves in the forest chapel, which to the end of my days I shall remember with trembling horror.
Thank you for listening to this harrowing tale. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to Bug-Eyed Tales for more spine-chilling adventures. Your support helps bring vintage short stories back to life.